Welcome to the channel, and in today's video we visited this unbelievable memorial site of Auschwitz Birkenau, which was the former death camp that murdered many lives of the Jewish population in World War II. It still is one of the most visited sites across the nation and globe that plenty of visitors like myself had to come and see the truthful fate of the grounds. You had to come here with respectful intentions. This one is probably the hardest visits I ever done, which you will see that I had to take it all in. I will try my very best to explain this site in detail as possible, and I have my vision of explanation of how I felt. Entering the main entrance here in Birkenau, this was our first stop for a self-guided tour that we took. As you can see how fast the former campsite, which stretches around over a kilometre each way of the four corners. So it is one of the biggest former death camps that still exists to this day. While walking through the original fences and gates that once stood here, you have that feeling of how these prisoners would have felt and heading towards their barracks, which you will see how the conditions what would have been like. Some of the interior in much further along the barracks and sides are replicas, but all of the stoves, latrines, etc. are still in its positions. As for most people that would know, it would have been extremely awful conditions, with it being cramped. You can only imagine how hundreds of people slept in these barracks that had next to no hygienic facilities. Walking along the tracks, you just see this one lone carriage that sits in the middle of the camp, which shows you how truly the scale it was. It would have been filled up with hundreds of people that would be counted for, and many that stepped out would be their last look of the place before being sentenced to their death. Again, walking along the tracks, I'm only about halfway in the middle of this part of the camp and really felt an eerie sense tingling across my whole body. The original guard post still stands to this day. There would have been a separation of the camp where no mixes of women and the men. The children would have been with their mothers before being sentenced to their deaths. The whole entire camp complex was made up with numerous of different departments of the SS Waffen elite garrison armies, as well with some of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe soldiers that were too old for the front lines, guarded this camp throughout its time period. This included multiple setup of structures like of the commandant's office, the political department, camp administration, prisoner labor, administration economic, camp SS medical service, and SS units welfare and training, and many other administration units. There was meant to be a much more expansion of the Birkenau camp, with added extra of barracks and buildings looking this way ahead that you will see here. Unfortunately, it wasn't built to this extent due to of being very late on towards the war before being liberated. Back walking along the tracks, it still amazes me of how far the camp was built. The intense and awful feeling of this all happened so much rapidly in construction to build such a terrifying outcome to the poor souls that lost their lives. It wasn't just the Jewish communities, there were also Poles, Czechs, Roma Gypsies, Hungarians, Romanians, and many other countries that was in the surrounding nation of Poland was rounded up and to be sent to their deaths. By mid-1942, it would have been resulted far more Jewish people to be sentenced to their deaths. The final solution, as Heinrich Himmler recalled it prior of the beginning of the war. He was a well-known genocide believer who thought he could get rid of the same race, which failed of course. I have reached the end of the track, of which you see it's about roughly 800 meters long, and it shows the other side of the camp where the entrance is. Now I will go through these gates to view, which is one of the unspeakable things to see with your own eyes. This is one of the two gas chamber and crematorium free site. Before the gas chambers that was blown up by the Nazis, they tried to dismantle and erase the evidence, however instead destroyed the chambers so that there is just stone and brickwork left with little to no evidence of the crimes left. The true scale size of the particular gas chamber is astonishing, and surreal to see it up close is eye-watering, which makes my body go through a lot of emotions at the time. I really felt in a dark place when exploring this part of the camp. Knowing true well knowing how many people actually died here just breaks my heart. This here is a memorial plaque that was built in memory of the people that was killed here, of which is in many different languages. A lot of nations suffered in their own ways due to this Holocaust. I walked to the other side of the area where the second gas chamber was located. Once again, the sheer scale of this chamber shocked me throughout. Knowing full well how many innocent lives was lost here is tragic. This is also the crematorium's second site. The Nazis would also dissect the corpses for any jewelry and items on the victims, then soon pursue of burning the bodies and scattered their ashes across the fields next to the chamber. I never felt so sick in my life at this point that I definitely needed a short time to myself. There were three separate commandants that took control of the camp, with the first being SS Obersturmbannführer Rudolf Höss from May 1940 to November 1943. His successors were Arthur Liebenschel from November 1943 to May 1944, and the last one, Richard Baer, from May 1944 to January 1945. You can see here that most of the structure buildings have been destroyed, including many of the barracks that kept prisoners here. As you walk through the different gate sections, you get that feeling of many of the souls are still walking among us. This part of the camp is sheltered for women and children, if I stand corrected. Again, most of the barracks are similar in size, but has a different layout of what you will see in a moment in the video. As you will see that and notice, there are no showers in these barracks, which states of course the lives of them having in the gas chamber is such a terrible mindset, but the SS officials didn't care about. only just the water basins and light facilities of usage. I'm going to briefly explain why Rudolf Höss was the most brutal commandant ranking officer of this Auschwitz Birkenau camp. He was truly the most evil person that would damage and destroy many lives of these poor prisoners throughout his reign of charge. After hearing Hitler's speech in Munich in 1922, Höss joined the Nazi Party member number as 3240 and officially turned away against the Catholic Church, was since like that at his early age. He helped out with Martin Bormann, who would become private secretary under Hitler. Höss would later join the cavalry squadron of the Schlosstaffel on September 30th, 1933, and also become a SS Anwärter. He would be noticed by Heinrich Himmler himself in 1933 during an inspection in Stettin. Some documents suggest they knew each other from the Ottoman League days, while other sources thought of knowing one another since Höss joined the Nazi Party membership. On 1st April 1934, Höss joined the SS division. On the same year, he moved towards the Death Head unit, in which he was assigned to Dachau concentration camp, where he would be a block leader. During the invasion of Poland in September 1939, Höss would have assignments for him to get promoted to the ranks of the Waffen SS. He would kill the first German man who refused to enter military service, and soon after, during January 1940, he ordered numerous of prisoners in another concentration camp to do work outside in -26 degrees weather, in which they had no proper clothing and refused infirmary. This killed off 145 inmates on that full day. Höss was given the command of Auschwitz Birkenau in late April 1940. He must concluded the further of creating the 3 of the major camps and many other sub-camps in the area of Lesser Poland. The earliest inmates at Auschwitz were Soviet POWs and Polish prisoners, including peasants and intellectuals. Some 700 arrived in June 1940 and were told they would not survive more than 3 months. In June 1941, Höss received superior orders from Himmler that the camp would turn into a final solution chapter of killing all Jews, and wasn't allowed to speak about it to any of the high command officials in the Nazi Party. Himmler told Höss that he would be receiving all operational orders from Adolf Eichmann, who arrived at the camp 4 weeks later. In September 1941, the first of many prisoners were sent to Auschwitz, of which during a standard camp operation was around 2,000 Jewish came in full train loads, would be some amount for 4 to 6 weeks. Prisoners would go straight to the small built gas chamber in the forest nearby to keep discreet away from the camp. Those who were fit enough would work in the labour camps. Soon after, 4 large gas chambers that was built, that I'll show you, the 2 main ones in the earlier video, was built for mass volume for the victims. Höss used many methods of gassing, of which one of them is cotton filters soaked in sulfuric acid for his early killings. However, the new hydrogen cyanide was officially used, which is also known as Zyklon B, for which he used this experiment on Soviet POWs. The reason why this was a popular choice was because the victims would be dead with 3 to 15 minutes in the chambers, and no screams would be heard in the Eichmann's trial testimony in 1961. Höss came into contact with an Austrian prisoner who she was a political communist member. He formed a forceful relationship on her, which led to corruption, and horrible events occurred during the time. This soon got the attention of Lieutenant Konrad Morgan and his assistant Welbeck, where tasks were investigating both the embezzlements taking place in the camp and Höss's illegal relationship. However, this would fold immediately, and proceedings would never take place until after the war. Höss soon would be demoted from Auschwitz camp commandant in November 1943, and led to other roles across the party state. On 8th May 1944 would become the worst day of the camp for a mass exodus of killings. Hoss returned to Auschwitz, of which he would condemn the Operation Hoss as part of murdering 430,000 Hungarian Jews that was transported here in the space of 56 days. About 10,000 would be gassed every day throughout May and June, but due to the high demand with very limited capacity of the camp, the SS would resort of having the prisoners stripped off their clothing and shooting them in a hidden fire pit where the Sonderkommandos led them to, and the bodies would be thrown in the flames. On 15th April 1946, Hoss testified at the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, where he gave a detailed accounting of his crimes. He would give estimate figures on how many Jewish and other ethnic background prisoners that were killed in Auschwitz camps. Hoss's trial lasted from 11th to 29th March 1947, and he was sentenced to death by hanging on 2nd of April 1947. The sentence was carried out on 16th April next to the crematorium of the former Auschwitz I concentration camp. The worst of the buildings that I will show you here is so unbearable to even have a peek of. This one and only barrack was used to kill the unborn babies and taken away from their mothers and murdered them, as well with lethal injections from the SS doctors. Probably the only fiercest and horrible crime to even experience in existence, in my opinion. Now, after experiencing Birkenau camp, we are proceeding to enter the main and original built Auschwitz camp. This whole complex of camps are all connected, and there are others scattered in the area which don't exist as much of these two that are still here to this today. Auschwitz was built by the Nazis for it to begin with as an experiment on the prisoners. That this is what our driver told us, which I myself already knew long ago, but couldn't believe it until you see it for yourself. Most of the buildings you will see here are original, apart from some of that has been reconstructed, like the gas chamber you will see towards the end of the video. At this point we only had about 2 hours to view some of the buildings inside, so we decided to look at what the driver recommended sites to view. This would be following a guided map route. Walking up to the main gates showed a much horrific story behind the stories that you might have heard across multiple platforms of how these prisoners was treated. The sign, which is well known across the globe, means works makes you free, which gives the illusion of the prisoners that everything will be okay, but in reality was false promises. This building here is where they would have had an orchestra band playing in front of it. This was to assemble marches of the prisoners and keeping them in line and counted for. Just many methods of humiliation and embarrassing towards them. Each block was pretty much a similar layout, and vast majority of them would have held prisoners in their hundreds. It still amazes me to this day that this site still exists. The Nazis, towards the final days before the Soviet liberation, tried to destroy much of it, but never occurred in this camp due to them running out of time before the Soviets eventually came through. From this part of the video onwards, I almost completely broke down of seeing plenty of the former prisoners' shoes laying over top of each other, which showed you how many have passed on. These shoes, and with many other clothing garments, would have been collected by the worker prisoners before the other prisoners sent to their deaths. What made it more noticeable that the colour red of some of these shoes have not been faded completely, and it shines out away from the others. I cannot explain the further meaning behind it. Next is the collection of the luggage from the prisoners, where these belongings would have been emptied and sold onto trade. Mostly the Nazis were keen on valuable treasures like gold and silver jewellery. Other items would have been mostly destroyed. There are many sensitive photos across the whole site, so I will not show you the true scale of this death camp. You will have to come here to see it for yourself, how horrible war is and what makes people like yourselves feel. Even the ground pavement floor is original and haven't been taken apart over that time period, which just shows you how much of this place is left untouched. Now coming up is block 11, which is known as the punishment block, where prisoners would be brutally tortured. These punishments concluded with interfering within the enemy, which is included likes of suspected sabotage, contact with civilians, escape attempts, or aid to escapees, or apprehension while escaping. Normal cells was a fair-sized room with windows partly bricked up, and the windows had blacked out with the vents on the outside, with some cells having bunk beds for inmates. Beginning of 1942, prisoners were also punished by confinement in standing cells. There were 4 spaces measuring less than 1 square meter each. The only source of air was a 5 by 5 centimeters opening covered with a metal grill. Prisoners had to go work in the early morning, with most cases at the earliest of dawn. The punishments could last on various times, leading up to several weeks. There was a Catholic Polish priest whose name was Maximilian Kolbe. He resorted of exchanging one fate of a prisoner who was a Polish sergeant in the army who cried help next to him and spared his life for his. Kolbe was one of the confinement cell with many others. He was executed with 4 others by lethal injection. Soon afterwards, in the afterlife, he was canonized. Here are 2 posts that still stand for extreme punishment, which resulted of tying up of prisoners unable to touch the ground with their feet, and sometimes it could have ruptured their tendons of shoulders, which could deem them unfit for work. And before that, you would have noticed the death wall reconstruction, where the prisoners faced a quick fatal shot of being killed. It was dismantled in 1944. There really is no known figures of how many people were exterminated here in Auschwitz Birkenau camps, but the estimates are around 1.1 million perished across its lifetime of 5 years of existence, but again this could be much higher due to unrecorded documents. This included 1 million Jews, with 70,000 of Poles, 21,000 of Roma and Sinti, 15,000 of Soviet POWs, and 12,000 of other ethnic backgrounds. The numbers could go further beyond, but nobody will ever know. Many records was lost and destroyed at the time during the war. By the end of 27th January 1945, the camp was liberated by the Soviets, of which beforehand the SS soldiers ordered around 58,000 prisoners on a death march, where they would be carried out to abandon Auschwitz, which would result into their deaths. The Red Army managed to save just a mere 7,600 prisoners left in the camp, barely surviving. With the data accounts from them, while searching the entire camp, they found a huge amount of tons of human hair, with also over 1 million of men's suits and women's dresses. As you see here, as I entered the reconstructed gas chamber, this would have been an experimental exercise that was designed to create extermination against all the prisoners that would have been really poorly in their early years of war. This soon changed when confirmation by the Nazi state to kill all of the Jewish population. As well, the guards and the higher officials made a mockery of the deceased Jewish ashes by snorting into their system. This is only a glimpse before entering the chambers, as filming wasn't allowed due to respects of the site. Thank you for watching. This was truly a difficult video to create in a way that I was trying to understand and figure it in my head why such grounds was built. Please consider liking, comment and subscribing to the channel for the like of these videos where I explore more personal experiences of details in depth. Stay tuned for future adventures.